All right, this is going to be a fun video, pretty quick one, I hope. Essentially, I am doing a blind beer tasting, and it's all crappy light beer, with a buddy of mine. So we have a bracket. We're doing a double elimination tournament style bracket. There are 12 beers, though, in the running, and I need to find a way to appropriately randomize the pairs of beers and print them out so that the people who are pouring the beer can reference them, fill out the bracket, pour the beers, do all that stuff without us having any idea what we're drinking. So, I'm working on a Mac. I'm going to use Python to do this project real quick. For any project I'm working on, I tend to make a new folder for it. What do you mean make this? I think I already had this idea, so I made it earlier, but I didn't actually do anything with it. So, we made our directory called brackets. Again, I'm in my home directory, just in the brackets folder now. Anytime I'm working on a Python project, I create a new virtual environment. Traditionally, following the standard, I just call it venv. In this case, we're not going to end up installing anything outside the standard library anyway, but we'll go ahead and activate our virtual environment just so we have it in case we need it. Also, just going to throw it out there now, we're not actually going to be writing any logic to print out the bracket or anything like that. I already have a bracket printed. All I'm doing is randomizing the pairs and matching up the beers in a way that somebody else could just run this and get the outputs, and that's that. So we created our folder. We're going to go ahead and open it in VS Code, which is what I use as my editor. I recommend it. Takes a second to open because I'm recording, but once we have it open, we're going to go ahead and create a new file called main.py and go ahead and close our welcome editor. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put in our shebang. Essentially what this does is it tells the shell how we can run this file main.py without us having to tell it that it's Python. So on a Linux system, this means I can type, path to main.py, and I don't have to say Python path to main.3y. It's a very small time-saving thing. Also, you can see down here is telling me pylint is not installed. VS Code will recognize when you have a virtual environment. It's actually down here in the left-hand corner. So any extensions then that VS Code needs, it will try to install in the virtual environment. So let's just go ahead and tell it to do that. Great. So we're working with beer here. So the first thing I want to do is basically list out all my beers. Now, if I'm going to be changing this a lot, or I needed it to be easy to manipulate or something like that, I would find a way to use a configuration file or something like that. But because this is kind of a one-off thing and I know what I'm doing, at least I tell people I know what I'm doing, I am going to go ahead and just use a Python dictionary. And to save you the trouble of watching me type out all these beer names, I've already typed it out and I'm just going to copy paste. But I'll point out the syntax real quick. So we have beers equals, this is a Python dictionary if we're using the curly brackets. And a dictionary is key and value pair. So in this case, our keys are integers, so we have 0 to 11. And our values are strings, and these are all of our beers. Please don't judge us. So next thing, I like to write all of my code in a main function. I don't ever just write procedural Python really outside of a main. Occasionally, for one-off stuff and quick things I do, but in this case, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of stub in a main function. So great. So if I wanted to run that now, when I call main.py, all I would do is say the only thing I want to run is main. However, it's good to get in the habit of treating our code as if it may be imported and used somewhere else. And we don't want main to run if somebody's going to import our code and use it somewhere else. So we have a special variable in Python that's defined by the interpreter when we call it, or when we run it, called name with 2 underscores like this. And we're going to say if name equals main. So only if this name variable is equal to this other weird underscore underscore main underscore underscore do we want to run the main function. So this means if somebody imports our Python script into their own, and then they run their own, and they call ours, it's not going to run the main function, right? Great. So how are we going to get started? Well, essentially, what do we want? At the end of this, we want to have a list of beer numbers, essentially, that we could tie to names. So we're going to just go ahead and create that list, and we're going to say pairs equals and an empty list. Now inside of pairs, I'm intending to use tuples. So a single pair would look like this. I'm not going to actually define this here, but I'm just showing you what a tuple looks like in Python. And tuples can actually have 3 values if you want, and maybe even more. I don't know. I think it's stupid they can have more than 2. But anyway, so pairs, empty list, great. So obviously we want to randomize our list. We don't want to just pair 0 and 1, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, whatever. You know what I'm saying. So to do that, we're going to make use of Python's standard library, random library. I'm just, I have used this enough times that I know about these functions and stuff, but it would be really easy for you to, if you just go to Google, type in Python random, you're going to get the information you need. So essentially, there's a function in random.randint, and it takes 2 parameters or arguments, A and B, and both are an int, and these define the bounds on our random number that gets returned. So in our case, we're going from 0 to 11. And if I just print this, throw a print function around it, and now on Linux, we have to set our script to be executable before we can run it. So I'm going to do that here, and then, like I said, because of my shebang over back in VS Code, I can just run main.py directly. I don't have to type Python 3 main.py, which I can do that. I have an invalid syntax. I forgot a colon, and my editor was actually telling me that, and I ignored it. So Python 3 main.py, or I can just run main directly. And in this case, it's just printing a random number, 0 to 11. Great. So what do we actually want to do with our random number, though? Well, we need 2 random numbers because we're creating a pair. So let's say pair equals random.randint 0 to 11, random.randint 0 to 11. And then if we print pair and go back to our terminal and run, you can see we get a pair. But like you can see here, we already kind of ran into an issue. There's no sanity checking when it's making these pairs. So for 1, these 2 numbers are the same. And for 2, if we were to do this, 10 times, there's no guarantee that these numbers wouldn't be the same. Like if we ran these back to back, we can see 8 appears in both sets. So how are we going to keep track of numbers we've seen? What else can we do? Well, for one thing, I'm tired of typing this already, the 0 to 11 nonsense. I very seldom recommend wrapping a standard library function as simple as randint in your own function, but in this case, I think it makes sense. So we're going to do that. So we're going to make our own randint function, and all it's going to do is return random.randint 0 to 11. Now, that would obviously change how this looks, but we're going to go ahead and just get rid of this line entirely because we're going to change all of our logic. Now, the reason for this in this case is because every time I type it, I have to type 0 and 11. I have to make sure that I don't accidentally type 12 one time or it's going to mess everything up. Also, if I changed it, let's say I get one more beer, 12, other craft beer, and that would mean I need a comma here. I only have to change this in one place now. I don't have to go through and find and replace every single instance, right? So in this case, I'm advocating for creating a randint function. Takes no arguments. It's very specific to our use case here, and I think that's fine. Great. On to the next one. So what are we going to do? So essentially, we know that we need to generate pairs, and we're going to have 6 of them because we have 12 beers. It's pairs of 2. So we're going to base our entire code basically on a single while loop. So we're going to say while the length of pairs is less than 6. Because once we have 6 pairs, well, we know that we have all of our numbers, right? We can't have more than 6 pairs if we have 12 inputs and we're grouping them in 2s. So while length of pairs is less than 6, we're going to say int1 equals randint, int2 equals randint. And then we're going to say pair equals int1, int2, And then pairs, this is our list, dot append pair. And then outside the while loop, once it exits, we're going to just say print pairs. So if we go ahead and run this, we do get a list of 6 pairs, but we still have the repeat number problem. So we got to go ahead and fix that too. So the next thing to do is essentially, we're going to define both of these. We're going to create a new list actually, and we're going to call it scene. And that's going to contain a list of numbers that we've already used. So for each of these loops though, sorry, we're going to create 2 loops. So inside this while loop, we're actually going to create 2 more while loops. So for the very first one, for int1, we're going to say while int1 in scene. Sorry, I meant to put this down here. Oops. Oh boy. While int1 in scene. So what this is going to do is, while the value int1 is already in the list scene, we're going to say int1 equals rand int. We're just going to keep reassigning it a new random value until it's not in our list. Great. So that means by the time we move down to pair here, where we're defining our pair, we know int1 is unique. Now we have another problem though. There's still no, so we could do the same thing with int2. So we define int2, and then we say while int2 in scene, int2 equals rand int. So we're checking if it's in the list, and that's good. We would still come out with a pretty decent result here, but we would get stuck at some point for a reason. So we would probably get stuck in this while loop potentially on our last run. Not guaranteed, I think. Because we also want to make sure that int2 is not equal to int1. So while int2 is in scene, or int2 equal to int1, we're going to reassign int2 and then regenerate our pairs. Now the last step of this is making sure that scene gets appended with our values. So scene.append int1, scene.append int2, and if I run this now, we should end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 unique pairs. Run it a couple times to look for anything outstanding, but I'm pretty confident in the logic here. Great. So that's awesome. At the very end of the lesson, or the very end of the day here, we could just use these numbers, give the person pouring the beer list, and that would be that. But let's make it a little bit more elegant than that. Rather than just printing out the pairs, let's actually print the names. So let's do this. Let's make a new function called print beers. And we'll call that here in our main. Beers. And all print beers is going to do is do all the matching for us. So we're going to iterate through our pairs. So for pair in pairs. And then we're basically just going to print beer 1. And then we're going to do some curly brackets with a 0 in them. And then we're going to say beer 2, and then a colon, and then some curly brackets with a 1 in them. And what's this for is there's a function we use called format. And here we can say pair 0 and pair 1. And essentially the format string, the format modifier, if you will insert pair 0 and pair 1 into our curly brackets. Now, when it does this right now, tuple object is not callable. Pair, maybe it's square brackets to call a tuple. See, I'm not going to lie. I don't know everything about Python. I know how to find what I need about Python when I need it. And line 29 is giving me, right, I'm missing a single parenthesis. Right, beer 1 is 11, beer 2 is 8. Beer 1 is 2, beer 2 is also 5. All right, the output doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of beer 1, beer 2, but it will in a second once we change it. So pair 0, pair 1, at this point are just numbers. What we actually want to do, though, is reference our dictionary. And so what we can say is beers, and then I think, again, I don't actually know everything about Python here. Beers, pair 0, and beers, pair 1, invalid syntax. How do I keep mismatching my parentheses? You'd think using an actual editor Dict object not callable. All right, turns out it's also square brackets, and I know nothing about Python. But I've been jumping around so much, recently especially in programming languages, that I'm not surprised that I don't really know what I'm doing. Main.py. Here you go. Beer 1, St. Archer Gold. Beer 2, Heineken Light. That's the first pairing. Beer 1, Bud Light Platinum. Beer 2, Miller Lite. That's the second pairing. Let's come up with some better verbiage here. So, let's actually do this. Let's do matchup. 0 is 1 and 2. And then let's do this. So for pair in pairs, we'll say counter equals 0. And actually, it makes more sense to start at 1 for this one. Counter equals counter plus 1. So we're just adding a simple counter. So matchup, we're going to say matchup and then the counter number, counter, is, and then we're going to have the first beer and then the second beer. So if we run this now, clear my terminal. Matchup 1 is Miller High Life and Coors Light. Matchup 2 is Mick Ultra and Labatt Blue Light, blah, 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 so on and so forth. You get the idea. I think this was pretty straightforward. I think this was a reasonable way to do this. Obviously, you could do a billion different things to further randomize it, or you could go ahead and draw out the bracket in any sense that you wanted. But this is how I'd approach this problem.